in many places, the works that I'm showing here would not be accepted. It wouldn't be accepted into the category of the production of history, into the testimony in a law court, into a police interrogation room. But still, they're very lucid ways of understanding the world and its conditions. So that's why I kind of think that it's important to highlight these inadmissible evidence, these fragments, but also to use the space of contemporary art to exhibit them, to experiment with the conditions by which we hear testimony. And that's really what the exhibition is doing. So the exhibition begins with a work called After SFX. It's the sounds and stories of my personal sound effects library that is built from the ways in which witnesses to events and crimes describe sounds, particularly the way they use objects to account for the missing language that we have for sound. We don't have the words and the vocabulary to describe sound. And so often people reach to objects to describe the sounds they're hearing. Then in here, this space, we have a work called For the Otherwise Unaccounted. And this is building on the research of a guy called Dr. Ian Stevenson. From 1997, he published his life work called Biology and Reincarnation towards the etiology of birthmarks. And he believed that birthmarks, or he tried to prove the hypothesis that birthmarks were an index of the way that people died in their previous life. So the birthmarks on newly incarnated people were somehow a remnant of how that person died in their past life. And he went around the world doing field work in Alaska, in Lebanon, Turkey, South Asia, Burma, which was Burma at the time, now Myanmar, Brazil. I'm looking at the birthmarks to let me know which country is which, and Nigeria. What's so interesting about his research is that he is trying to prove a theory. In his dogged approach to trying to prove that theory, he actually uncovers something else entirely, that reincarnation is a strategy that is often employed when people face different kinds of erasure, historical erasure. They don't have access to the law, they're not part of history books, no media coverage is covering the injustices that they face. And so these birthmarks become a kind of strategy to store testimony in the body of the next generation. A testimony that would otherwise be lost because of social and historical factors like forced religious conversions, land expropriation, colonization, and legal amnesties that come in the wake of civil conflicts. What I've done with the birthmarks that were in the original Stevenson text, which are photographs, you see the body and where they're placed, is I try to sort of abstract them from his kind of specific ethnographic gaze and just isolate them as these little fragments, as these stains on a page, as something that in itself makes its claim to the storage of the testimonies that are stored here and the testimonies that they attest to. And they're shown here in this kind of raised ink printing process, a debossed strategy, which is an analog process which uses thermographic debossing. So the ink reacts to heat and it lifts itself from the page. And so you have this sort of strange textural contrast between the kind of matteness of the paper and the kind of moist or like alive birthmark, the kind of heat reactive substance on the surface that has leaked through and raised up. So moving from kind of popcorn makers and green coconuts and sesame seeds and tray racks and carpet beaters, the kind of debris that constitute the first room of acoustic memory, then into kind of birthmarks, and then here into a kind of sea of unidentified facial features and noses and eyes and mouths and lips, and the 8 different random faces that are used to produce this one portrait. And this is a work that is a continuation of the work inside, Once Removed, in which what we're trying to do is speculate how Basil, a reincarnated historian, looked in his previous life. He has many images, but he doesn't know how he looked. And so I contacted people who do age progression and facial synthesis for missing persons cases, Dr. Caroline Wilkinson at the John Moores University, to create a synthesis of what he might have looked like when he was 16, when he died. And this was the result. This is her making the image. And what's of course interesting in this, again, it's not necessarily whether or not it does look like him. Although that's been useful to look back through Basil's archive and see if he has anyone who looks like this in his archive. But what's important is not that it looks like him or not, but that it's a portrait of reincarnation itself. It's these 7 or 8 faces that come to make up this one portrait of Yusuf al-Jawhari that sort of starts to speak about the kind of anti-individual, anti-singularity that such a kind of position forces us to take. So, did you ever try to get them to correct it?
I told them many times. They told me whoever made the plaque or marble engraving did it wrong, and most of the dates are wrong.
Okay. And what was it about this statue that actually kind of triggered your flashbacks?
Just 3 fellow comrades.
It didn't matter that they were from a totally different
No, it didn't matter. It's just like there were 3 soldiers who died together, and yeah.
And then Basil, you just kept drawing Arlington from when you were like, this 3 soldier statue, sorry, not Arlington. You kept drawing it from when you were like 5 all the way up until you were like 13. There's many images. This is a work called Once Removed. It's a 2-channel video installation, which is an interview I did with Basil Abi Shaheen. Basil is a historian who, in pursuit of his unexplainable memories and flashbacks from a past incarnation as Yusuf al-Jawhari, the child soldier who died in the Lebanese Civil War, he began to kind of account for those missing memories and those fragments in his mind, and started to archive photography, flags, memorabilia from the militia in which he fought in his past life. What makes Basil's testimony so compelling and makes his historical work so compelling is that it's actually one of the few ways we can access what happened in this time, because all kinds of blocks and obstacles to the production of history have been placed in Lebanon, such as an amnesty law which forbids the legal retribution of any crimes committed during the Civil War. There's not in the textbooks of school textbooks, of history books. So paths to witnessing have been blocked, which have caused for new kinds of witnessing to emerge. And that's why I think in this context it's important to listen to this new category of witness, which is the witness of the returned people from that war.